Good afternoon. My name is Dave Coleman. I'm co-founder and managing director of the Carbon Literacy Project, and it falls to me the happy duty to welcome you to our Museums and Galleries Carbon Literacy Toolkit launch event. So first of all, welcome. We're expecting well over 100 attendees to this webinar, so I'm just going to do some housekeeping first of all, and then I'll explain a little bit more about what we're going to do throughout the afternoon. So if I share my slides once more. First of all, this is a Zoom webinar. So as attendees, your cameras and microphones will stay off. You have nothing to worry about suddenly appearing on screen or being audible. If you use the chat facility within Zoom, you will find that it isn't visible to other attendees, so we suggest that you don't. Panelists will be using chat behind the scenes just to cue each other in. But if you want to interact with us or want to ask questions, please use the Zoom Q&A function at the bottom of the Zoom screen. We'll be answering questions using that function live throughout the whole webinar. So people will be responding to questions as the various speakers are on. So you can ask questions of interest or fact, or ask questions to put to the panel later on. If you want to, you can do that anonymously, or you can appear as your attendee name. But do be aware that things you write there will be in the public domain. Others may be able to see them. We are recording this webinar mainly for our own purposes, so your questions and answers may become visible now and as part of that recording. But we will have an open Q&A where we'll review everything that's been asked up to that point, and the panelists will chat that through and answer your questions near the end of the event. If it's of assistance to you, live captioning is available. Again, if you look at the CC button at the bottom of your Zoom screen, if that's of assistance to you, you can trigger live captioning. We'll also have because this is a 90-minute event, we'll have a short break halfway through if you want to move away from the screen for a few minutes, albeit we'll probably just chat informally and maybe I'll show a short video during that break, but it gives you the opportunity to move your attention away from the screen should you choose to do so. We will finish on time, we will finish at 3:30, but if we have too many questions to answer in the time, there'll be an additional chance to answer after the event because the panelists will stay around and a few minutes after the event ends, we'll reappear and we can run through any questions we didn't have time to answer as part of the main event. So the agenda for the afternoon, this is the introduction. We'll find out a little bit more about what carbon literacy actually is, so we have a solid foundation for the explanation of the toolkit. And that will be done by Natalia Phipps. We'll have an introduction to the Roots and Branches project by Lindsay Jones and Kay Hardiman. We'll have a message from Arts Council England. Polly Bentham was due to join us and has been unable to, so she's recorded a contribution and we'll show that. Then we'll have a short break. And then finally, we'll actually show you the toolkit itself. We'll tell you a little bit about what's in it and show you some of the content. And that will be done by Jack Warden and Alison Criddle, who've developed the toolkit on behalf of the sector. We'll then talk a little bit about how you can access that toolkit and what rollout support is available to you. And then you'll probably have heard enough from us by that point. So we thought it would be useful for you to hear from some people who've actually implemented the toolkit or seen it in use as part of the pilot process. And therefore, we're going to have 3 guests from various museums from different areas of the UK to talk a little bit about their experience with carbon literacy so far. And then we'll have an open Q&A for the last 10 to 15 minutes. And we'll answer any questions that have accumulated by that point. And then, as I said, we will close at 3:30. So we hope we have more than enough there to keep you entertained throughout the afternoon. I'm going to disappear behind my PowerPoint in a moment or two. But the first thing on the agenda is a little bit of an introduction to carbon literacy itself. So as I say, we have a solid foundation as to what carbon literacy actually is. And so to do that, we have the Carbon Literacy Project's Head of Sectoral Development, Natalia Phipps. So I shall hand over to Natalia.
Thanks, Dave. Good afternoon, everyone. It's great to see so many people here today for the Museums Toolkit launch. I'm just going to be covering a little bit about what carbon literacy actually is for those who are new to the process. So the actual definition of carbon literacy is an awareness of the carbon costs and impacts of everyday activities, and the ability and motivation to reduce emissions on an individual, community and organisational basis. So we often like to split this definition into 2 parts. The awareness part of actually knowing what the carbon costs and impacts of activities is really important, but providing people with the ability and motivation to go out there and actually make tangible changes within their lives to reduce their own carbon footprint is really important, and that's what makes carbon literacy training really unique. So to give a brief history on the background of the project, this definition was refined by the Carbon Literacy Working Group 10 years ago now. It's our 10-year anniversary, which is really exciting. So it was created from a carbon literacy working group following a baseline study. And from that, the carbon literacy standard was created, which outlines the requirements for a training course that produces carbon literate individuals. This approach was then piloted in Greater Manchester, where the project is based, and began the coordination of the Carbon Literacy Project, who now deliver the project on behalf of the Carbon Literacy Trust. So there's 4 really important parts of the Carbon Literacy Standard, which offers a framework for the content of a carbon literacy training course. And this is broken down into these 4 sections, which are knowledge, learning method, values, and action. And each of these has a list of criteria that the content must align with in order for it to be certified as a carbon literacy course. So the first one to cover is knowledge, and this is generally what participants who take part in the course will learn about. So the first being the science of climate change, then moving on to what the impacts of climate change are on both a global and a local level. Then we talk a little bit more about what's already been done to address climate change. And then we dive a bit further into what organisations can do. So in this sectoral specific context, that's what museums can actually go and do to address climate change. And then as well, what individuals within those museums can do. The second part is the learning method. So carbon literacy is 1 day's worth of learning. So it's 7 to 8 hours of training. And this was found to be the minimum amount of time that was needed for people to actually learn about what climate change is and then go and change their behaviour as a result of it. The behavioural studies said in an ideal world, it would be a week's worth of intensive training, but sadly not everyone can give away that amount of time. So that 7 to 8 hours is kind of like the minimum amount of time needed to go and make those large scale behaviour changes. The learning is local, so it's taken to where people are at within their walks of life, within their place of work. We try to ban polar bears from training, because if people actually responded to those kind of scientific messages, then we might not be so far down along the road. So we really try to make it local and have that context specific to people. The third part is delivery by peers. So peers such as like people that you work with, they're our most trusted source of information. And it's really important that training is delivered within organisations so that they can really get the most out of training. The fourth part is the group inquiry. So carbon literacy is quite unique in that it's not just sitting and listening to a PowerPoint presentation. There's plenty of opportunities for breakout rooms, for activities, if delivery is happening online. And it's really about people coming up with their own solutions through those group discussions. And the last part is positivity, because climate change can be quite a doom and gloom topic at the best of times. So it's all about inspiring people and making them motivated so that they come away from the course with that understanding, but actually realise that taking action on climate will lead to a better way of life. The next part of the standard is values. So the carbon literacy values recognise all the different levels of climate change and its impacts. So there's these common threads which are threaded throughout the course, highlighting that the action of individuals can and does make a big difference, and that we need to work with others to create change. And overall, the outcome of these changes we need to see can lead to a better way, a better world and a better way of life. And it's really important that we cover throughout all the courses equity and fairness. That value is like really intrinsic to the training. And then finally, training should also acknowledge that for some people, addressing climate change carries with it enormous and emotional content, both positive and negative. And this shouldn't be ignored, but acknowledged and really used to drive action and really motivate people. And the final part of the standard is action. So to attain your carbon literate certificate, you must pledge 2 actions which you will implement as a result of your training. And these actions are assessed by us at the Carbon Literacy Project before you're awarded your certificate. And this is one of the most important parts of the training. And it's really what makes it unique, is that you're doing something to address climate change. You're going out there and reducing your carbon footprint as a result of it. So one action is an individual action, so something the learner can do without the permission of others. You can just go ahead and do it. And then the second one is a group action, so something that you can do with your colleagues or your friends and your family, something you can do alongside others as part of a wider group. And both of those actions should be in the context of where the training takes place. So really focusing on like your job role within your sector, in this case being museums. And just to dive in a little bit further to the training process, so contrary to what popular belief, if you first come across the project, the Carbon Literacy Project, we're not a training organisation, so we don't deliver any of the training. We're actually the accreditation body which sits behind carbon literacy training. So we review evidence and do all of the evidence certification for people who are passed as carbon literate, and we also accredit all of the courses and toolkits. So the way this works in terms of using this Museums Toolkit is that any UK museum can access the toolkit. It's been created and designed by us to be delivered by any member of your organisation, regardless of carbon literacy training experience. So you don't have to be a certified trainer to deliver carbon literacy training. We often encourage people to go on a course and become carbon literate themselves. But if you have a passion for the subject matter and you're a reasonable communicator, the aim is that you will pick up the toolkit, hopefully, and be able to deliver it in your organisation. So after you've conducted that training, evidence is submitted to us at the project. And if the criteria is met, then we will award you and your people certificates. So carbon literacy certifications happen at different levels, depending on if you're an individual, if you're an organisation. So for individuals, you can become just trained in carbon literacy yourselves. If you wanted to go on to become a certified trainer, then you can go and do that. And for organisations, there's the Carbon Literate Organisation Award, which has 4 different levels, which is bronze, silver, gold and platinum. And that's really to demonstrate your commitment and your engagement with climate action. So this is just to give you a bit of a brief overview of the kind of organisations that we're working with. Just a bit of a snapshot here. These are all the different universities that we're currently working with. There's probably far too many for one of these slides, but a lot of this work has happened as a result of previous toolkit projects, which have been funded by some government work within the public sector, and similarly with local authorities and regional governments. So we've really seen the evidence of this toolkit process and how it can really speed up the process of organisations to get involved with carbon literacy. And lastly, just to evidence a few organisations of people who work. There's some logos here that you might recognise, but it's really, really spreading, which leads me on to my next slide, which is a snapshot of where we're at as a project at the moment. So we've just certified over 25,000 people, which means that 50,000 actions have been pledged. We've engaged with over 2,134 organisations and over 282 courses have been designed. And that figure on the bottom right is an estimation from Jacobs Engineering, who did some research and found that in terms of carbon savings per person, about 5 to 15% is saved from people undergoing the training and then changing their behaviour. And just to give a bit of a snapshot into how quickly that we're growing in terms of compound growth, the project grows by 50% every year, which means the number of certified citizens actually doubles every 20 months. And last year, out of this 25,000 people who've been certified, 8,000 of them were actually trained in 2021. So it's a really exciting time, and toolkit projects such as this really help to expand our growth and make sure that this message is getting out to as many people as possible. So the usual way that carbon literacy works is an organisation will contact us and say, okay, we really want to do training within our organisation. How do we get started? So we provide a criteria checker and the framework in which people can go away and write their course, because every single carbon literacy course is different. No two are alike, because your audience is going to massively vary from schools to community courses to bigger corporates. So to produce an accredited course, most organisations will follow this process. They'll write their course, send it in to us to be criteria checked. We will then criteria check it and give it that kind of stamp of approval. And organisations will pay to have that course accredited, and then they will then own that and be able to deliver it to their people. What we're doing slightly differently here is our toolkit approach. So the main theory behind the toolkit approach is that they maximise the speed and adoption of carbon literacy for a particular sector. So instead of all the different museums in the country going away and writing their own carbon literacy course, a much better method that we've come up with is to kind of pull that best practice together and come up with this more generic toolkit, which is still adaptable, but it's really sector specific, and it means that it reduces costs so that not everyone has to pay for certificate course criteria checking, but it also saves a lot of time with people having to start from scratch. So the toolkits are designed to be sector specific, and the development always includes representatives from the sector, and I'll cover this in a little bit more detail afterwards. So this ensures that the materials cover the most important and relevant topics. They're customizable, so it still allows for tailoring, and you can put in your own case studies, but it means that you just don't have to, you've got that kind of foundation and base to start from. And everything which is needed to deliver the training is included in the toolkit. So there is a detailed trainer manual containing comprehensive instructions and explanations of all the training materials. There's a slide deck, an interactive activity pack, and there's regularly updated lists of resources, which contains general and museum sector advice and links, which you can use as an individual and as a museum sector worker. There's also a getting started pack, and all of the evidence forms needed to complete the training are within there. So it really is everything that you would need to deliver. And how is it delivered? So there's a number of different ways that you can deliver carbon literacy. It really is designed to be adaptable for your specific organisation, depending on how you wish to run the training. So it is a one-day course, but it can be split how you like. It could be two half days. You could split it into 4 evening classes over a month. It is really up to you. You can deliver it all together in one session. So you can deliver it face-to-face or virtually, depending on your working situation at the moment and where your staff are working. And we recommend about 20 learners per session. And as I mentioned before, that peer-to-peer delivery is really important. So if you can have people within your organisation and build up that trainer base to then go out and regularly deliver sessions to your people, that's one of the most effective ways of doing it. But also, if you wish to get an external trainer to come in and deliver some sessions, that's possible too. And then the course has to meet the carbon literacy standards, those 2 action pledges I mentioned before. So the toolkit is free to access, but the only cost is the £10 per learner certification fee attached to it. And that's just to cover the administration costs at our end. But the actual toolkit is free to access as it's been funded. And this is just an overview of all the toolkits that we have in all the different sectors so far. And we're really, really excited to add museums to this list. So the carbon literacy for museums toolkit, just to dive a bit further into that. As we said, it's free to use. It can be used to train staff, volunteers and trustees within the sector at any level. It contains the materials that are specific to the sector, and it will be regularly updated by us to make sure that it stays relevant. Any UK museum can access the toolkit, and it's been created and designed by us alongside Museum Development Northwest and Manchester Museum to be delivered by any member of your organisation. And if you're an accredited non-national museum, you'll be able to access additional support through the Museum Development Network, including trainer training and support from Museum Development Carbon Literacy officers in delivering this toolkit within your organisation. And some of my colleagues will talk a bit more about this later on. So the Roots and Branches project is the collaboration between the Carbon Literacy Project, Museum Development Northwest and Manchester Museum, which aims to support the museum sector to become environmentally active and aware. And we'll talk about this a little bit more later on, but just as an introduction, the project was launched to coincide with the start of the COP26 conference and seeks to support 1,500 museum sector staff to become carbon literate over the next 2 years. So it's a really exciting and ambitious project. And the development of these materials has been supported using public funding by National Lottery through Arts Council England. And we just really like to thank all of the contributors during the development of this toolkit, because we really wanted to get as much industry input as possible, and there was no shortage of that, which is fantastic to see. Like, we might be clued up on all things carbon, but to make this truly applicable to the museum sector, we helped to enlist some of the experts from various branches of the industry. So I'm going to pass over now to Lindsay, who's going to talk a little bit more in detail about the project.
Thanks very much, Nat. I will just bring my screen up. So, good morning, good afternoon even, everyone. I'm Lindsay Jones from Museum Development Northwest, and I'm joined by my colleague Kay Hardiman. We are both Museum Development Officers, and I'm going to tell you a bit about our role in supporting museums with environmental sustainability and our involvement in the creation of this toolkit, which we're launching today. Museum Development Northwest is part of a wider network of museum development teams across England, and we are funded by Arts Council England through the Museum Development Programme to support museums in the 9 English regions. We are also part of a wider network across the UK, working with museum development providers in Wales, Scotland and Northern Ireland. For Northwest museums, climate and carbon action started way back in 2010, when the first Green Museums programme was launched. And in 2016, we worked with Manchester Museum and Carbon Literacy Project for the first time to develop a carbon literacy course for museums. This was used to train staff at Manchester Museum, and they became the world's first carbon literate museum, and Museum Development Northwest became one of the first carbon literate training organisations. The carbon literacy training became part of our core programme from 2017 to 2020, and we soon saw the demand for the training across the sector was more than we could support, whilst the urgency for action against climate change was growing. So in 2021, we worked with Manchester Museum, Carbon Literacy Project and museum development teams in England to develop Roots and Branches, a project designed to accelerate environmental action in the sector. And we are pleased to say that we were successful in receiving lottery funding from Arts Council England for the project.
So what is Roots and Branches? So the roots of the project will take place at Manchester Museum, where a new post, an environmental action manager, will support the development of a co-working environmental hub on the 3rd floor of the museum. The hub will bring together museums, educators, environmentalists, artists, researchers, third sector organisations and students, with the aim to help the sector to see how we can grow back greener, encourage communities and individuals to take environmental action, and to highlight to local authorities, government funders and the wider cultural sector how museums are fulfilling their environmental responsibilities. So the action will really begin at Manchester Museum from March onwards, when the new post holder will start her role. So the branches of the project are the rollout of the carbon literacy training to extend the reach of carbon literacy in a way we couldn't have done without Arts Council funding. So one of those branches is today with the launch of the new carbon literacy toolkit for museums. And the toolkit is for people who work, volunteer and govern museums, as well as the freelancers who support those museums. From today, the toolkit will be available through the Carbon Literacy Project, and there'll be now dedicated pages on the Carbon Literacy Project website with all the resources and support for museums interested in rolling out the training in their organisations. So the toolkit has been thoroughly tested over the last few months through focus groups from delegates from museums across the North West and Yorkshire taking part in pilot courses, as well as input from Julie's Bicycle to help shape the toolkit. It's also been piloted with staff from museum development teams across England who are now trained to deliver the training themselves. And museum development teams across England will deliver regional carbon literacy courses over the next 18 months as part of their regular workshop programmes, supported by our new Museum Carbon Literacy Officer, Alison Criddle, who you'll meet later on. The branches of the project aim to train over 1,500 people across 300 museums over the next 18 months. And with all of those individuals pledging their 2 actions as well to really accelerate climate action in the sector. There's courses already up and running in many of the regions, including the North West, Yorkshire, South West and South East, and more are now being scheduled in the East Midlands, the North East, the West Midlands, the East of England and London. Some of the museums involved in the pilot phase have already scheduled their own carbon literacy courses to roll it out in their organisations, and that's really what we want to see, that roll-on effect and spreading that training as widely as possible. We'll also be promoting opportunities for museums to get involved in the environmental hub at Manchester Museum over the coming months. And one of the next phases for us, once the carbon literacy training is up and running across England, we will be researching and developing deep dive webinars for later in 2022 that will be accessible for museums as well through Museum Development Programme. And these will allow museums to explore in more depth some of the topics that we talk about in the carbon literacy training. So for COP26, we invited museums to use the hashtag Museum Carbon Stories to show how they're using their collections to communicate issues of climate change and also to highlight what actions have already been taken to mitigate their own impact. And the Carbon Literacy Project also featured the museum sector as one of their sector days when they were up in Glasgow for COP26, which included online presentations and case studies of what museums are already doing. So if you're looking for some inspiration as a starting point, search the hashtag Museum Carbon Stories on social media platforms. And you can also have a look at the recordings from the Museum Sector Day, which are on the Carbon Literacy Project's YouTube channel.
So now that you've heard about the project and you might be wondering how you can do the training, we'll go through that in more detail later on how you can do that. But I've put some links up here, one to find out more about the Roots and Branches project, one to the MD UK website if you're not sure who your museum development provider is or how to get in touch with them, and one with the details for the MDNW staff if you'd like to talk to Kay and I about the wider project. This project wouldn't have been possible without the support of Arts Council England. We received funding of £136,750 for it through National Lottery project grants, and I'm delighted that Arts Council England are able to be involved in this webinar today. So next up is a pre-recording by Polly Bentham, Senior Officer for Environmental Responsibility at Arts Council England.
Hello everyone, my name is Polly Bentham and I'm a Senior Officer in the Environmental Responsibility team at the Arts Council. Thank you to Museums Development Northwest for inviting me along today. I'm really sorry that I can't attend in person, but I am very happy to be able to talk today about why we funded the Roots and Branches project and how it relates to our 10-year strategy, Let's Create, in which we introduce our 4 investment principles, including environmental responsibility. Through this toolkit, we hope to be able to support you and your organisation in delivering on this investment principle. And we're really excited about the toolkit launch and how this can support the museum sector. Arts Council England's strategy, Let's Create, acknowledges that the climate crisis and environmental degradation will be the most significant challenge facing all of us over the next decade. We know that action is needed, and this is why environmental responsibility is included as one of our 4 investment principles. The Roots and Branches project received lottery funding last year in 2021 through the Arts Council's Open Access Funding Programme project grants. The project was funded for its contribution to environmental responsibility and for the support and development it would offer to the museum sector. The project has strength in its partnerships with the Carbon Literacy Project and Julie's Bicycle, and its launch was timed to coincide with COP26, the recent climate summit in Glasgow. We believe the project can have a really strong legacy, and we're excited to see how this materialises in the future. So thinking about Let's Create, the strategy is built around 3 outcomes, which are creative people, cultural communities, and a creative and cultural country. We expect that adoption and active use of the Museums Toolkit by the sector can contribute to all of these outcomes in some way. This could be through programming climate-related work with young people, forging new community partners, delivering or working on social prescribing projects, or testing new technologies. There's lots of directions this could be taken in. If we look at the environmental responsibility investment principle more specifically, this is made up of 3 elements, which are understanding the data, plan, action and change, and influence, educate and advocate. And the Carbon Literacy Toolkit will help you to deliver against all 3 elements. So to collect, understand and report on the relevant environmental data for your organisation, once you've decided what data you need to source or collect, of course. The toolkit can be used to inform your future strategies, policy and plans, and also your programming and determining what and how you share with your communities in terms of project outcomes. It may be useful to revisit our Let's Create outcomes and the environmental responsibility essential read, and possibly also the governance guide for boards as you begin to use the toolkit. And Jack and Ali are going to discuss more practical applications as they talk through the toolkit later. It's worth remembering that, as the Roots and Branches application noted, the climate emergency is both a cultural and social justice issue. We know that marginalised and disadvantaged communities already experience greater climate and environmental impacts. So use of the toolkit may therefore also offer potential crossover with our other investment principles, particularly inclusivity and relevance, and that's worth keeping in mind. We're not expecting the sector to suddenly become environmental experts, or for every action and project that you take forward to be a success. Research and experimentation are a valued part of the process, and we hope that you will share your journeys with the sector and with us. As part of this, we would recommend you make use of the National Hub of Environmental Action that's based at Manchester Museum, which also forms part of the Roots and Branches project. We hope that the toolkit can provide you, your colleagues and your organisation with agency, skills and confidence to navigate the environmental responsibility investment principle, that it supports you in reviewing where you can have the greatest environmental impact and influence, and that it can help you to plan and deliver actions and projects, and ultimately that it enables you to become confident and ambitious cultural leaders on environmental responsibility.
So thank you very much for those words from Polly. Everybody's been entirely professional in terms of their contribution so far. We are dead on schedule, and we'd programmed in a 5-minute break now, just because we were aware it was a 90-minute event. So for the next 5 minutes, we're not going to do anything vital as regards the toolkit. So if you want to stand up, stretch your legs, have a quick comfort break, go and make a quick cup of tea, that's absolutely fine. But we're also acutely aware that this carbon literacy toolkit is about the juxtaposition between dealing with sustainability on the one hand and culture on the other. So rather than having 5 minutes of dead air, we thought we had an opportunity to do something more interesting. So we're going to show you a short video, which will last about 5 minutes. It was originally recorded for the Carbon Literacy Museums and Galleries Action Day that took place during COP that Kay has already mentioned. And it comes in the form of a poem by poet and writer Louise Walwyn.
Who are you?
Me, Louise Walwyn. I'm just a poet and playwright, I'm not famous. We have 9 years. That's 108 months, that's 468 weeks, that's 3,285 days. takes almost 300 million seconds to decarbonise and harmonise, to work with nature's finite resources. We have the answers, we have the solutions. Let this be our legacy, our revolution to save this world. To calm the rising tides, to quench the thirst of forest fires. We know this isn't a drill. We know this is an emergency. Time to stop mucking about. Time to take responsibility. As every second counts, so does every human. Time to turn our carbon conscious, brilliant minds to keep this show on the road. How are we going to hold on to this priceless, fragile home of ours? Here in this city, they called it a revolution. The cogs of industry, the cogs of slavery and inequality gave birth to global scale pollution. Here in this city, another revolution grows. We are the city of radicalism, in a place teeming with creativity. We demand our fair share and to share fair. This time, no one should be left behind. Now the factories are forges of our imagination. We are a place of innovation, inspiration. Here in this city, we are learning new ways of working, linking culture and environment. We are sharing what we have, what we know. Let these seeds of change grow. We are fighting back. We have got nearly 300 million seconds. Think about what you love about our home. It's not about going without. It's about joining all the dots now, so no one's left with now. If we all collected less stuff, there'd be more to go around. Small actions and big ones are casting our future. It's exciting. Imagine looking back in 300 million seconds time and knowing each time we collaborated, each time we put self-interest to one side, so that if Villette was painting our world in a decade, it would be clean air and the real colour of sunsets that he can see. The rivers cutting a smooth path, no more angry winds sweeping away the crops, no more melting ice, the North Pole and the South Pole left frozen and mysterious, weather patterns restored, no more stinking landfills. We don't buy into waste anymore. Imagine knowing that it is we who pulled ourselves back from the brink. We listened to our striking children. We did it ourselves, together, because we acted on a chance to reclaim a future. It's ours, for each and all, for everyone. In 300 million seconds, we saved our beautiful world.
I hope you enjoyed that as much as I did. We thought it was really inspirational when it was used during COP, and therefore we thought this was a very good reason to share it with you now. If you'd like to ask anything about what we're talking about, or if you're completely lost in the process or the technicalities, a few people are already using the Q&A function within Zoom, please do. We can either answer the question by text as you do it, or we will store that question up and come back and handle it during the Q&A section at the end. So we've built a foundation so far. We've explained what carbon literacy is. We've explained what roots and branches is, and we've heard from the Arts Council. So it's now time to actually have a look at the toolkit itself in a little bit more detail. And to do that, we have Alison Criddle and, first of all, Jack Rhodes Warden to introduce themselves and explain exactly what the toolkit is. Over to Jack.
Thank you very much, Dave. Just share my screen. So my name is Jack Rhodes Warden. I am the Museums Coordinator at the Carbon Literacy Project.
And I'm Alison Criddle. I'm Carbon Literacy Officer at Museum Development Northwest.
So we're going to be talking a little bit about why the Carbon Literacy for Museums Toolkit is such a valuable resource for the sector, what's included and how you can access it. So firstly, why carbon literacy in museums? As you all know, we're facing a climate crisis driven by greenhouse gas emissions, and museums have a significant carbon footprint. So as in all sectors, there's a real need to act to help limit the dangerous impacts of climate change. And so the toolkit is a really powerful resource for this work within the sector. It will provide your staff with skills and confidence that they need to take some really impactful carbon reduction action within your museum. Carbon literacy also speaks to the museum sector's role in society as stewards of culture and of nature. Museums are trusted institutions in our communities and they engage millions of people every year. And they tell the most important stories of our planet. So ultimately, museums are perfectly placed to engage with climate change and empower communities to reduce their emissions. And so the Carbon Literacy for Museums Toolkit can be a catalyst for your museum and support you in delivering these vital societal messages addressing climate change. And as well as this, climate action and environmental responsibility have become really core central values to both audiences and to museum funders of all stripes. So our communities, our audiences are overwhelmingly in favour of climate action. And so as public institutions, museums have a responsibility to act on behalf of their audiences. And at the same time, funders as well have placed environmental responsibility as a core value. And so carbon literacy and the toolkit can help your museum meet the expectations of audiences and funders as well. So I want to talk a little bit about the delivery format. As my colleague Natalia said, it's 1 day's worth of learning. The toolkit is split into 4 different modules. Is designed to be delivered in an online working environment, so Zoom or Teams, and it contains some independent learning. And as Natalia said, it can be, it allows for a customized schedule. So whatever is best for your museum, you can deliver it in that way. So if that is once a week for 4 weeks, then that's perfect. If it's over 2 consecutive days, that's fine too. And it's been designed to be picked up by any member of staff and delivered within your organisation. So what will your staff have gained? What will they have learned having done this toolkit, having completed the training that's included within the toolkit? They'll have gained an understanding of the basics of climate change and how climate change is impacting everyone, and also have gained an understanding of how climate change is affecting museums. They'll have explored the impact that museums can have on tackling climate change. Staff will have created 2 actions, so an individual action and a group action, to help reduce the carbon footprint of your museum. And they will have explored strategies for influencing others to take action on climate change as well. So just thinking a little bit now about the course outline, what's included in each of the modules, what will your staff learn? So in module 1, we'll look at climate change science and the impacts of climate change on the UK and on museums. In module 2, learners will think about the role of museums in taking climate action and how they can play a part in creating a more sustainable and equitable future. And staff will also look at the co-benefits of taking climate action for museums. So how can other museum priorities, other than carbon reduction, be achieved through taking climate action? So that might be on finances, it might be partnerships, it might be on audiences. And then in module 3, staff will look at the policy position on climate change, both internationally and nationally. Think about that, how that relates to museums and their work. Staff will look at carbon footprints, both in the workplace and in their personal lives. And staff will also really start to think about what actually makes a low carbon museum. And then finally, in module 4, staff will begin thinking about their actions, planning their actions, and also think about having conversations about climate change within their spheres of influence as well. And my colleague Ali will just give you some information about what you will actually find within the toolkit now.
Thanks, Jack. So yeah, we're going to explore a few of the different slides and types of activities and what you might expect to find within the toolkit if you're picking it up. So throughout the training, we've woven in these green explainer slides. So these are definitions that feature throughout the course and act as sort of handy go-to devices to help to unpick some of those key phrases that we use throughout the training. So we might be unpacking carbon reduction terms, so like the one you see on screen of net zero, as well as some terminology that can help us in our low carbon practices and considerations. So we might explore what are the Sustainable Development Goals, what do we mean by greenwashing, and how can we consider intersectionality to better help us to embed and align principles of equity and social justice with carbon and climate action. We'll also find within the course some blue slides. These blue slides can be edited to better fit your region or your museum or your delegates. So as a trainer, you might wish to add content that demonstrates local case studies or examples from your regional museums. So you can insert these climate change impact case studies here or use ones that are provided within the toolkit, such as the one that you can see on screen. And we'll explore some of the different learning styles.
Apologies there.
It's all right. It's lively. So we can expect throughout the course some different types of learning styles and some different activities. So we've really tried to tailor and consider different ways of which people learn, but also the online format as well. So if I'll walk us through these different bullet points on screen, we might have some self-guided learning. So we share a pre-recorded video and ask participants to watch a documentary, as well as activities that we ask learners to undertake, such as identifying carbon-related objects from within their own environments or their museums, and calculating our own carbon footprints as a really good jumping off point for discussion. As well, we'll have some group discovery, excuse me. So within the live online sessions, these aren't classrooms per se, but rather they're spaces for us to engage and have dialogue through a range of different material and media. We also have sector case studies and scenarios, and I'll come on to those more a little bit in a moment. So the Carbon Literacy for Museums Toolkit has been developed thanks to the insight and the contributions of individuals and organisations within our sector who helped us with piloting and helped us with focus groups as well. So as a result of that, we've tried to embed case studies from across the sector that celebrate and share these initiatives and speak to the challenges that we face. We also use things like breakout rooms and dialogues. So working in smaller groups, we can hone in on specific themes and topics to dig that little bit deeper in the same way that we might undertake a group work around a table in a face-to-face environment. So, and then we'll feed back together in plenary or in a group discussion. So one example of those activities, and Jack touched on a little bit on it just earlier, is the co-benefits of climate action activity. So this is an example that uses our own sector's actions and invites learners to consider the multiple benefits of committing to reducing carbon and positively influencing climate action. So these are case studies of real initiatives that are already taking place and have been undertaken by museums and networks across England. So we can consider how taking action can align with those museum values. It might help us to enable to consider ways to build sustainable futures for our institutions, to think about sustainable finance, but also enhancing our reputation and collaborating together through partnerships, as well as developing and strengthening the relationships we have with our audiences and our communities. It's worth saying as well that throughout the training, we utilise online platform functionalities to enable learners to engage with us in lots of different ways, because everybody's learning in a different environment. And so to ensure that we use things like chat, we use the breakout rooms, we use different ways for people to interact so that everybody has a voice on the screen and in the Zoom classroom as well. So everything that we do throughout the course, throughout our learning, is guiding us towards taking action. So at the end of the training, learners are sent a link or a form to complete. And these actions and evidence on the form determines whether or not the Carbon Literacy Project can certify that learner as becoming carbon literate. So as the culmination of all of the learning throughout the course, learners create at least one significant individual and one significant group action to reduce a carbon footprint. So as in the Louise Warren poem that we just saw during the break, this is about joining the dots between climate science, emissions awareness and opportunities. So learners are asked to explain the significance of the actions and the impact that they can have to reduce carbon emissions. So in order to best prepare these actions and to get us thinking about it, during the toolkit and during the training, we dedicate a portion of the course to working together to consider our ideas, to do a bit of brainstorming, and to share our actions with one another as collaborative and engaged peers. So bouncing ideas off each other in the way that we do best as in our sector. And it's worth saying as well that learners can also submit evidence in ways that help to explain their answers in a range of different ways. So it could be written down, it could be drawing or annotated diagrams or recorded audio or video files to enable them to help best to explain and convey more fully in a way that suits them as to what the significance of their actions is and why they're taking that. And it's been really exciting to see some of the actions that have come throughout the pilot training as well, that really interesting in seeing how people have been conveying their evidence and thinking about their actions moving forwards. And yeah, we're really looking forward to seeing what those future actions will be throughout the toolkit. So what's included in the museum's carbon literacy toolkit? So there's a variety of elements which you can use to deliver the toolkit within your organisation or your network. We have a detailed trainer manual, so that contains comprehensive instructions and explanations for all of the training material. It almost has like a script within it. So it outlines each activity, the delivery format and the timings. Our slide deck is our mega PowerPoint, which you will use to deliver the training with your organisation. And like we just saw, it has those green and those blue slides that we can work through and tailor to suit our organisations. There's also an activity pack, which can be used to enhance the learning experience of activities within the course and can be distributed to learners. We have a regularly updated list of resources which contains general and museum sector advice and links, which you as a trainer can use and individuals can use as well. There'll also be a getting started pack, which contains everything you need to get your trainer off the ground within your organisation. We have the templates to those action evidence forms, which will then be used by the learners once you've delivered the training. So this is what the Carbon Literacy Project check through for when you're getting your actions certified. And you'll also receive within that the streaming links for the documentary and the pre-recorded materials, which currently at this time includes a pre-recording with Jack and myself. So you get the link to that to begin the undertaking of module 1. So we tried to preempt a few questions that might be buzzing around in the air, or questions that I thought I might have when I first started building this with Jack a few months ago. So saying, I'm not a sustainability expert, can I still become a trainer? So absolutely is the answer. The trainer manual contains all of the information you need in order to be able to deliver the Carbon Literacy for Museums course. And we really recommend buddying up and delivering it together with somebody else so you can share your learning as a trainer together. Will the toolkit be kept live and up to date? Yes. So we'll be regularly updating the materials and resources, just as policies and news keeps updating all the time within climate science and climate awareness. So too does language, and so too do the case studies around us as well. So we'll be regularly updating them throughout the project. And will there be a toolkit for in-person delivery? So yes, watch this space. There's going to be a face-to-face version that we will be developing later on in the spring of this year. So as the world begins to open up, we'll be ensuring that we can adapt and continue to create the toolkit in a way that suits us being in a face-to-face environment as well. So I will hand you back to Jack now, who's going to walk us through some of the toolkit pathways.
Great, thank you, Ali. So the toolkit has been designed so it can be delivered by any member of staff, and we strongly recommend that you become carbon literate yourself before delivering, just so that you have a really good understanding of all the content that you are delivering. The toolkit is free for any UK museum or sector organisation to deliver certified carbon literacy training, meaning that you plan to submit evidence to the Carbon Literacy Project for certification. So outside of this, you need to contact the Carbon Literacy Project to discuss usage. There is a £10 per person certification fee, and that is used to cover Carbon Literacy Project administration costs. So there are 2 different pathways to access the toolkit, and that depends on the type of museum that you are from. The first pathway is for people working or volunteering in accredited non-national museums in England only. So if this applies to you, you're eligible to access support through the Roots and Branches project. So if you're not already carbon literate, you're eligible to attend free carbon literacy courses provided by your local museum development provider. So if you're interested in that, please contact your local museum development provider and ask about free carbon literacy training. I think my colleague should be posting the website you can go to in the chat. The £10 per person certification fee may still apply, and it's worth checking with your museum development provider about that. So once you're carbon literate, eligible museums can also access additional support from Alison, who you just met, who is the Carbon Literacy Officer at Museum Development Northwest. And through Alison, you'll be able to access additional support, including Train the Trainer workshops, which will provide you with training skills that are specifically tailored for this toolkit. And so if you're interested in this, you can contact Alison at the email, which I hope is being posted in the chat as well. And so once you're carbon literate and you're ready to roll out the toolkit in your organisation, you can contact Alison, or you can contact the Carbon Literacy Project as well to receive access to the toolkit. So the other pathway is for museums that don't fit the previous criteria. So if you're from a national museum, if you're from a non-accredited museum, if you're from a museum outside of England, or if you're a museum sector organisation, you can still access the toolkit for free, but who you should contact and receive support from in the first instance is a little bit different. So please contact the Carbon Literacy Project directly at museums@carbonliteracy.com. That email address should be in the chat as well. We can discuss next steps. So if you're an organisation that's not had any contact with the Carbon Literacy Project before, we usually arrange a chat either online or on the phone so that we can understand your plans for delivery a bit better and support you on your next steps. And so, as we mentioned before, we strongly recommend that you become carbon literate yourself. And so you can look at our events page. There's a few open courses that are appropriate for any audience on there. That link should be in the chat as well. And this is something you can speak to us about as well if you need any additional support. So just to summarise, if you are eligible for the Roots and Branches pathway, what are your next steps? So contact your local museum development provider for details on free carbon literacy training. You can contact Museum Development Northwest Carbon Literacy Officer Alison Criddle at the email address on screen for support and info RE training, the Train the Trainer workshops. And you can then contact Alison Criddle or us directly at the Carbon Literacy Project for toolkit access and begin rollout in your organisation. If you're not eligible for Roots and Branches support, all good. You can contact the Carbon Literacy Project directly at the email address on screen to arrange a meeting, and we can discuss your plans for delivery. You can book onto an open carbon literacy course to become carbon literate yourself, and you can begin rollout at your museum. I'd just like to quickly draw attention to some additional resources that we've got available on our website. So if you feel like you're someone that's going to have to advocate a little bit for carbon literacy within your organisation, we have resources available that can help you make the case. So we have a specific making the case document, which highlights the various benefits, so financial, social, museum specific, that you can achieve through carbon literacy, as well as carbon reduction. We have testimonial videos from people who have been through the course and who have delivered the course. And this is also where you'll find this webinar recording. So if you're interested in viewing this webinar again or sharing it, keep your eyes peeled on the website, and it should be up there in the next week or so. And finally, if you'd like to stay in touch, we have a Carbon Literacy for Museums newsletter, which will contain news and opportunities within the sector, news about open courses, tips for trainers, and we'll also keep you updated about any changes to our materials, because as Ali said, we're going to keep that live and up to date, and so we will let you know about changes via the newsletter. You can also keep in touch at our social media accounts, which are on the screen, alongside those of Museum Development Northwest. So I'd quickly just like to thank our funders of the Toolkit at Arts Council England, and our partners at Museum Development Northwest and Manchester Museum, and all of our contributing and piloting organisations as well. So I'm now going to hand over to Dave, who is going to be speaking to guests from some of the piloting organisations about their experiences with carbon literacy. And if you have any questions about any of this, pop them in the Q&A and we'll get around to them at the end of the session. Thank you, and over to you, Dave.
Thanks very much, Alison, and thanks very much, Jack. So, as we've already highlighted, we've talked to you now, we've told you all about the toolkit, we've talked about all of the background to this, but you might well say, well, you would say that, wouldn't you, because you've created this toolkit. So we thought it was important for you to hear from some people that don't work for us or aren't involved directly with the project, and hear a little bit more about their experiences with the toolkit. So we have three guests. We have Cathy Moore, Anthony Wilder, and Jenny Dowell, and I'm going to get them to introduce themselves in order. So, Cathy, if I can come to you first, could you, in 60 seconds or so, just explain who you are and what you do, for what organisation, and what is it that's brought you to us today and involved you in carbon literacy?
Yes, I'm Cathy Moore from Share Museums East, which is the museum development programme for the East of England, and I'm one of the programme officers, and I've been taken over doing quite a lot of the stuff on environmental responsibility. Now that's part of what we have to do for Arts Council England, but I've also been doing lots of work in my previous roles in museums relating to climate change and biodiversity and lots of things along those lines. And I've just been involved in the Roots and Branches programme from the start.
Cool. That's all very good. Thanks so much, Cathy. Anthony, can I come to you? Can you tell us a little bit about who you are, what organisation you belong to, although you've given us a very big clue with that backdrop, and what you've done with carbon literacy so far?
Yeah, my name's Anthony Wilder. I'm the Chief Operating Officer of the National Football Museum here in Manchester. About 9 months ago, I put together a carbon reduction plan for the museum, and one of the key elements of that was training. And because I'd done some training with the Carbon Literacy Project about 3 years ago, it was the most obvious thing. And then when I found out about Roots and Branches, it was even better. So that's kind of where we've come from, and I hope to train all my staff by the end of the end of next financial year.
Excellent. We'll find out a bit more about that in a minute. And then over to Jenny. Can you tell us a little bit about who you are, your organisation, and what's brought you here?
Yeah, my name's Jenny Dowell. I'm Site Supervisor at Judges Lodgings Museum in Lancaster. We're one of a number of Lancashire County Council museums. And just over 2 years ago, I undertook a face-to-face carbon literacy training day with Museum Development Northwest in Preston. And out of that, I had my kind of individual and group action. And the group action involved setting up a green team within the museum and starting to look at what we could do. And then we got a sustainable improvement grant, which addressed a few of those things. But we were also then became one of the pilot museums for the Roots and Branches, the rollout of the Carbon Literacy Toolkit.
Excellent. Sometimes people come back to us and say, when people do carbon literacy and they pledge to do these actions and individual actions, we're like, do people actually do them? So you're a fantastic example of someone who clearly does. So that's all good. I'm going to go all the way around once more, and then we're going to open things up for a wider kind of chat. So Kathy, can you tell us a little bit more about what you've done as part of this project, as part of Roots and Branches, how you've been involved, and why carbon literacy? Why is it that carbon literacy is of interest? Because there are lots of things out there that the museum sector could use to try and progress.
Well, I've been trained as a trainer, so I'm going to be rolling out some training and delivering that across museums in the region, and hopefully also for our own team, our wider team of all of the museum development officers across the counties as well. And my background is as a science teacher and everything, so I enjoy the science bit of it, and I particularly like the fact that it focuses on carbon, and it's the clarity of purpose of this training, which I think is really helpful for museums, because there are a lot of things that people can do, all of which are very valid, but it's helpful to have ways of prioritizing and sort of understanding the impacts of it. So I'm particularly impressed with the training from that point of view, that it is very, very accessible, but also very clear, and gets people to address the impacts, and so they can prioritize it and actually have actions that are really going to make a difference, and they know with the differences that they're making.
Cool, that all sounds very good. So thanks for that, Kathy. Anthony, I'm going to come to you with the same kind of question. So there are lots of things that you could engage with. Why carbon literacy, and why particularly football? Or you're muted, Anthony.
You think I'd know about muting and unmuting by now, really, wouldn't you? 2 years in. Never mind. Yeah, essentially, there's many reasons, really. It wasn't something that we looked at carefully enough, and we really ought to try and minimise the footprint of the museum. We were aware that we had quite a lot of plant and equipment here that was almost 20 years old, and just like, changing your boiler at home, replacing after 20 years is a good idea. We also get funding from lots of different organisations, and more those organisations are saying, well, you need to have a carbon reduction plan or similar in place if you want to access our services, or if you want to be involved in kind of bids as well. So it was the right thing to do, but fundamentally, it really needs to happen. I think in terms of football, there are some clubs that really do take it very seriously, because football is, they fly all over the world and Europe and all these different kind of things. I think also because we have a lot of visitors, we have a chance to talk to people and talk about carbon literacy through some of the sort of schemes we have planned as well. So that opportunity to talk to people through society is kind of a benefit for us and for them, hopefully.
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the fundamental core principles of carbon literacy is about meeting people where they are. So rather than having something off the shelf as, right, you must deal with climate change, it's about talking about things that they are already interested in, and therefore meeting them where they are in life through the things they're interested in, the things that they are culturally interested in, the sport that they are interested in. So that's a fascinating journey. So we're particularly pleased to be dealing with a football museum. So Jenny, likewise, why carbon literacy for you? What have you done with it so far, and why carbon literacy in particular for you and your organisation?
I suppose the climate crisis, the climate and ecological crisis is real. It's with us now. It's getting more and more urgent. Action must be taken to avert hideous disaster. I mean, there are already lots of hideous disasters, but to prevent things getting worse and to sort of mitigate what's already happened, we must take action individually and as organisations. And when I attended the carbon literacy training 2 years ago, I actually found it really quite a difficult day. I found it very, very upsetting. I had a lot of grief and had a lot of anger. But within that day, I transformed to some extent from being someone who felt very cynical and very hopeless to someone who felt kind of sufficiently informed and motivated to take positive action. And I think for me, that's one of the big things about this climate literacy training. It gives you the base, the base level of what you need. It makes it relevant to the sector. Obviously, we're museums, so it makes us, what's it got to do with museums? What's our particular role? but then, you know, the whole focus on action, significant positive action, is, you know, and to encapsulate all that within a day, you know, that you can then kind of take forward and make significant long-term changes. I mean, you know, it's a no-brainer, really. You know, it's a you know, and obvious. I can't think of a sort of better, more effective way to use a day, actually, in you know, getting involved in that sustainability initiative.
Yeah, thank you for that. That's a lovely tribute. It's interesting that you touch on that point, but we are aware, and it's actually, Natalia said that we have a carbon literacy standard, and there's certain ingredients, and you covered those at a high level. One of them is the fact that we do need to make sure that courses address that issue, that for some people, particularly if they're very new to it, and suddenly realize how serious this crisis is, it's jaw-dropping and shocking, and we need to make sure that the training deals with that, because you're right. You know, they always say that the antidote to fear is action, and the antidote to climate fear is climate action. So that's always been one of the core values that we've had within the course, and it is something that you shouldn't ever be able to receive passively. You know, we get you involved intellectually, but then it converts into action as part of that day. So yeah, there's a lot crammed into a day, but lots of practice at making sure that the courses do, and the team that have written this course with the sector, for the sector, have done, I think, an amazing job. So one of the things that that people often see when they have colleagues that start to engage with carbon literacy is that changes occur. Each of you as organisations are still at the beginning of your journey with carbon literacy, because it's still a very new toolkit. We're launching it today. You've seen more of it than most. Have you noticed any changes either in things that you've done or your organisation has done, if you've already been engaged in carbon literacy to that degree? Because I know a few of you have been carbon literate for a while. What changes have you noticed, either in yourself or within your organisation, as a result of being carbon literate? Anybody that wants to answer that question?
Well, if I jump in quickly with, after I did the training and we got the green team, we applied for this sustainable improvement grant. And out of that, in fact, it changed a lot during the lifetime of the grant, partly because of COVID and other things. But, you know, we changed a lot of our lights to LEDs, which has had, obviously reduces energy uses, but also has, you often don't realise the sort of added benefits from actions, but, you know, it reduces fire risk. And it saved a lot of my time, because I used to spend so much time up and down ladders changing bulbs, and I haven't had to change a bulb since, you know, and we've got some bike racks and a hot bin, and, you know, and various different bits and pieces. And now, having been involved in the pilot, another two of our staff from my museum, from Judges Lodgings, got involved. But like the others, I'm going to do the train the trainer training, and we've already got arranged a carbon literacy training day, which is going to involve not all, but most of the museums from the rest of the Lancashire County Council Museum Service, and the senior museum manager. And there's a real urgency and motivation behind this at the moment, and I'm kind of really excited to see, you know, having the whole museum service involved. You know, hopefully there are going to be bigger and better things we can do. We can share experience and that sort of thing. And actually, on a sort of in a bigger scale, it's actually hopefully going to be taken out throughout the council. There's a new environment and climate cabinet member and an environment and climate manager who are really pushing that agenda forward throughout the council. So that's, you know, that feels really positive.
Yeah, excellent. Again, Natalia was covering this earlier, and today we're here to talk about museums and galleries. But one of the benefits of carbon literacy is the way that it is adopted by different sectors of society. So advertising another part of what we do, there is a toolkit available for local authorities. It was funded by BEIS, the Government Department of Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy. So every local authority in the UK has access to a free toolkit for local authorities. And in fact, there's different flavours of it for councils as organisations, for leaders within councils, for councillors who are politicians. And there's a toolkit for all local authorities. There's also a toolkit for universities. There's a toolkit for the NHS. There's a toolkit for police, fire and ambulance. So the carbon literacy that you as organisations and our audience are considering engaging in is the same carbon literacy, albeit adapted for different sectors, that's occurring all around. And it's very much, again, one of our core values, that the whole is greater than the sum of the parts. If we can coordinate this, so we're all doing things that are customised to us, consistent everywhere, the whole value of that whole exercise increases. So Anthony and Kathy, did you want to come in on anything that we just said about, Anthony?
Sure. The thing that I've really noticed is kind of a behavioural change. So before the training, I was forever turning off lights and turning off air conditioning and all these different things. Now I'm forever turning them on because people want me to work in the gloom now, I think. But it's really interesting. It's the absolute opposite has happened, which is fantastic. Just those tiny little behavioural things make a difference. And then on the large scale, our relationship with Manchester City Council as our landlord has changed quite significantly in the kind of upgrade of the building and how the building can be managed more effectively. It wasn't really a conversation we were having 6 months ago to that much of a degree. Now it really is. And so, some of these really big projects are gonna really transform the carbon footprint of the museum. So, yeah, big and small impacts.
That's great. Thank you, Anthony. That 15 minutes has gone incredibly rapidly, but Kathy, would you like to come in with any last comments for us?
Well, I was just going to say, as well as sort of exciting things for museums like events and exhibitions and things that we hope will be encouraged, there's also the sort of nitty-gritty things of seeing that we see more small museums measuring and collecting data and things now, which is really important, so they know what how to measure their carbon footprint. So yeah, just the whole thing of it being embedded. Although I support small museums, I work in a large organisation, Norfolk Museum Service, which has been doing a lot of this for a long time and had a sustainability officer back in the heady days of Renaissance in the region's funding, which was something a long time ago. But that legacy has continued. So there's lots of sustainable practice in how when galleries are refurbished and those sorts of things, which have been going on and will carry on in the future.
Excellent. Thank you very much for all of those contributions. As I said, that 15 minutes went incredibly rapidly, but don't go away because we're now going to open finally for a question and answer session. And some of the questions might be directed towards the three of you as people who've already been involved with the toolkit. They might come back to any of our panelists. I was going to go across to Natalia because we've been chatting. Natalia's had her eye on the Q&A. Is there anything that's particularly leapt out at you that we should be talking about now?
Yeah, so there's a few questions that have been asked that might be quite useful to answer live, Dave. So first one's from Eleni, who's asked, the toolkit and the course seem to be very useful and interesting. I was wondering, however, how can we use this certificate? Is it recognised by certain international or national organisations?
Okay, shall I take that one? I mean, it could be either you or I, but so the carbon literacy certificate itself, each participant that completes the training successfully and has their evidence checked and it meets the standard gets a certificate. Each certificate is uniquely numbered. So the first thing is it starts to form part of that particular individual's skills portfolio. Now, some people do nothing more than print them out, stick them on the office wall and say, look at that, I've got my certificate. But it does form part of someone's skills. Therefore, if they choose to change roles internally, or indeed they leave an organisation and join another organisation, they take that certificate with them. And increasingly, it's being recognised. I mentioned the Department for Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy. I mentioned the different sectors within which carbon literacy operates. A certificate from one sector is just as valid in another sector. So there are currently more than 25,000 people now walking around with certificates that can use them to get a better job. Or when you are recruiting, if you want people who are carbon literate, recruit people with carbon literacy certificates, because that counts. There are some other questions I know about carbon literate organisations, and part of that focuses on numbers of staff you've got that are carbon literate. If those staff join you because they got carbon literacy somewhere else, that's okay, it still counts. There is also a wider international footprint of this. We work quite a lot in Europe, in Australasia, increasingly, and in the United States, and there's a carbon literacy international logo certification is just as valid there. So that's the level of recognition that's achieved thus far. Back over to you now. I'm guessing there are probably more questions.
Yeah, there's another one here that's been asked anonymously. Is there any possibility for Overseas Museum Association, in brackets national scale, to work together to deliver this programme and run the training online?
I'll just quickly answer that one for speed. The answer to that is yes, absolutely. We work, as I just mentioned, in various areas all over the world. Because the toolkit has been funded here for use in the UK, we have no issues with it being used elsewhere. Drop us a line, info@carbonliteracy.com or museums@carbonliteracy.com, and we can start that discussion. We'd be fascinated to know what part of the world you're in.
Okay, great. Moving on, Richard has asked, what step is required to get a museum as its own entity certified under the scheme? Trustees will probably better support their organisation being awarded certification rather than individual staff.
Would anyone else, because you keep hearing from me, would anyone else like to take that question? Anyone from the Carbon Literacy team?
I'm happy to take that one. So Richard, we have a voluntary scheme called a Carbon Literate Organisation Scheme. That's actually to certify your organisation as a whole as being carbon literate. So there's 4 different levels for this. There's a bronze, silver, gold and platinum. And the different levels depend on a number of criteria that you have to fulfill in order to be awarded those certificates. So the first level is bronze, which is actually quite easy to get awarded. So you have to have a board member or like a member of senior management leadership trained in carbon literacy, and also have access to a certified course or toolkit. So you would, through this scheme, through this project, have access to the Museums Toolkit. It would just about be getting that member of senior management trained. And then the different levels kind of go up comparatively. So silver, I think it's about 15% of your workforce will be trained in carbon literacy. At the gold level, there'll be about 50% of your staff. And there's like various different criteria that you have to fulfill, such as inputting carbon literacy into people's appraisals, outreach, and trying to get more members of your community involved in carbon literacy and helping out that way. So that's how you can get involved with the scheme. As I said, though, it is voluntary and it is a paid scheme, but we can post the details of this within the chat and you can have a look at that. So I hope that answers that question.
I was having a look at questions actually earlier myself. There was an interesting question from Vicky with the Museum Trust, where she was highlighting there were 2,134 organisations that had contact with carbon literacy, yet only 70 were carbon literate organisations. What was that about? So I put an answer in the Q&A, but it's because the 2134 number is the number of organisations that have people within them that are carbon literate. So staff members or team members or participants or pupils or whatever it might be. The 70 is the number of organisations that are culturally carbon literate with the carbon literate organisation accreditation that Tanya's just described. And that means involvement of chief exec down culturally within an organisation. So it's a much more demanding accreditation than merely having some people that are carbon literate. But if you'd like to know more about CLO accreditation, as Tanya's just said, you can follow the link or you can have a look at our website and all the details are there. I also had a very quick question from Matt Davis, who was asking about organisations in different parts of Britain that might be able to help with this, particularly in Wales. And I only had time to write a 2-word answer before I came back live to say something. So I wrote Cynnal Cymru because they're the National Sustainability Charity for Wales. They've done lots of work with cultural organisations in Wales, particularly National Museum of Wales, Cardiff. So if there are Welsh participants today, Cynnal are a great place to go. In Scotland, Keep Scotland Beautiful, National Sustainability for Scotland would be a good organisation to contact, or Keep Northern Ireland Beautiful in Northern Ireland. But first of all, I'd go for museums@carbonliteracy.com and have a chat with Ali and Jack, and they'll put you in the right direction. Back over to you now. Are there any more questions that you particularly picked up?
Yeah, so there's one here from Anne Middleton who's asked, how have you found engaging with volunteers on carbon literacy? So Kay, would you like to answer that one?
Yeah, absolutely. So we've been delivering carbon literacy training since 2016 in the Northwest, and obviously now we're working with colleagues to expand that over England. And we've had lots of people on the courses, from paid staff, volunteers, trustees. And what's really nice is when you get a room where you've got a mixture of people from the different disciplines within an organisation, and volunteers, paid staff coming together, and actually the insights that you get from some of your volunteers, because museum volunteers are very passionate, very knowledgeable, have got lots of interests outside of the volunteering work as well, so they bring so much to the table. And actually what's really nice is the carbon literacy course gives them agency to make some changes as well as volunteers. So we've had really great feedback from volunteers that have said it's given them the ability and the confidence to then go back into the organisation and ask for changes to be made as well.
That's great, thanks Kay. We've had a couple of questions from Carol. One of them I'll pick up, one Jack I might pass over to you. First one being, I belong to local environmental community groups. Could I deliver the training to local community groups? So Carol, we really try to encourage courses to be delivered to that specific audience based on like the learner needs, and learning all about the case studies, policy, different things that they can do which are really relevant to them. So a course for community groups would be quite considerably different to museum sector staff. There are a number of community courses out there available, which a number of trainers have created, and we can help link you to those trainers. Quite a lot of them are open source, because community training, we really try to keep the costs down and really try to have that organic sharing space for trainers to be able to use each other's courses. So if that's something that you're interested in, please get in touch with us at the project. Just email info@carbonliteracy.com and we can discuss that with you in a bit more detail. The other question that Carol asked, Jack, if you'd like to answer this one, which is, I have a carbon literacy certificate and would like to be trained to deliver trainer. How can I do this?
Yeah, great. So Carol, if you already have a carbon literacy certificate, you are able to access the toolkit and deliver already. But if you're from an eligible museum, so one that's eligible to receive support through the Roots and Branches project, if you're from an accredited non-national museum in England, then you can contact Alison Criddle, who is the Museum Development Northwest Carbon Literacy Officer, and Alison will have all the details about that trainer. But just to quickly reiterate, you don't specifically need to be trained to deliver carbon literacy training. You don't need to be a trained trainer. The Train the Trainer workshops are like a valuable resource. So if you are eligible, I recommend making the most of it, but you don't need it. If you're not from an eligible museum, you can still be a deliverer, a trainer of carbon literacy in your museum.
That's great. Thank you very much, Jack. I'm going to dive in there because we're literally down to the last minute or two. But thank you very much for all those interesting questions and for the answers from the team. I'll just reiterate that, as Jack has really touched on, you've got the contact details regarding museums. We also have a specific newsletter for trainers, as well as a newsletter for the museum sector. So rather than being our generic newsletter, there's a specific one for trainers. If you navigate to the trainer page on the website, dive down to the bottom of that page, you'll find a specific login for that newsletter. It comes out infrequently, there's no frills, it just tells you the stuff you need to know as a trainer, points out new resources and all that kind of good stuff. But we have an online community of trainers called Carbon Literacy Pioneers, which is based around LinkedIn. If you look for Carbon Literacy Pioneers on LinkedIn, you will track it down. And it's basically a forum for carbon literacy trainers, of which I'm a number of hundred now, to interchange ideas, opportunities to do things together, seek assistance with things. So it's quite a lively community. And we make announcements to trainers through that window on a regular basis. So if you're at the beginning of your carbon literacy career and thinking about engaging as a trainer, those are both good resources to look up. So it falls to me to say thank you to everybody. Can I say thank you first of all to our guests, Anthony, Kathy, Jenny, and in absentia, Polly. Thank you for contributing today and being involved in the Q&A. Thank you to Lindsay and Kay for presenting Roots and Branches. Thank you particularly to Jack and Alison, who are effectively the authors who have brought together and curated this fantastic toolkit for everybody to use. So particular well done to you guys. Also to Fiona, Will, Rebecca and Helen, who work for us and have been hiding behind the scenes doing the technical stuff to do with videos, sound, question and answering all throughout the afternoon. And also obviously to National Lottery and Arts Council England, who have funded this whole initiative. We're going to end the formal part of this event now. But don't panic if your question has been answered. We'll pop back up, turn our cameras on again in a couple of minutes' time, and we'll mop up any questions that haven't been answered so far on air. But lastly, a big thank you to all of you who've chosen to spend some time with us and invest some time finding out more about the toolkit. We hope you find it useful and interesting. So if you want to, you know where to get in touch with us. In the meantime, thank you very much for joining us this afternoon, and good luck in all you do. And from me, the Carbon Literacy Project and Roots and Branches, for the moment, thank you very much and good afternoon.